The Galactic Academy's morning bells chimed through the crystalline corridors, their harmonious tones designed to calm the diverse species that walked these halls. Maya Chen adjusted her worn leather jacket and checked her schedule tablet one more time. Advanced Xenobiology with Professor Zenth Ka, Room 4 Alpha. She'd been looking forward to this class since enrollment. The classroom buzzed with quiet conversation as students filed in. Maya recognized most faces by now. The tall, graceful Altarians with their silver skin and flowing movements, the stocky Corvan engineers with their thick carapaces, and the ethereal Veiltar whose translucent forms shimmered like mirages. As the only human in advanced xenobiology, she drew curious glances but had grown used to the attention. Professor Zenth Ka glided into the room, her serpentine lower body moving with fluid precision, while her 4 arms arranged teaching materials on the bio table. The Naga professor's reputation preceded her, brilliant, demanding, and utterly intolerant of disruption in her classroom. Today we examine the fascinating reproductive cycles of the Kandorian hive minds, Professor Zenth Ka announced, her voice carrying the slight hiss common to her species. These organisms demonstrate remarkable adaptation to their hostile environment through synchronized breeding patterns. Maya leaned forward, genuinely interested. Earth's creatures had always fascinated her, from the tiniest tardigrades to the massive blue whales. But learning about life from other worlds opened entirely new perspectives on what was possible. The lesson proceeded smoothly until Kreshvor arrived 20 minutes late. The Thanagarian student's heavy footsteps echoed through the quiet classroom as his massive frame squeezed through the doorway. Standing nearly 8 feet tall with gray scaled skin and prominent bone ridges, Kreshvor embodied his species' reputation as fierce warriors. "Apologies, Professor," he rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "Transport delays." Professor Zenth Ka's 4 yellow eyes narrowed. "Take your seat, Kreshvor. We were discussing adaptation strategies." Maya watched as the large alien settled into a reinforced chair designed for his bulk. She'd seen him around campus, but never interacted directly. Thanagarians kept to themselves, and their homeworld's military culture made them seem intimidating to most other species. "As I was saying," the professor continued, "the Kandorians developed their synchronized reproduction as a response to periodic extinction events on their homeworld. Every 7 years, massive storms scour their planet's surface, requiring the entire population to take shelter in deep cavern systems." A Veiltar student raised a translucent hand. "How do they coordinate across such vast distances without technology?" "Excellent question, Shiren. They utilize a form of biochemical communication, releasing specific pheromones that can travel through their planet's unique atmospheric composition." Professor Zenth Ka manipulated the bio table's controls, and a 3-dimensional model of the Kandorian homeworld materialized above the surface, complete with swirling storm patterns. Maya found herself thinking about Earth's own extreme weather events: hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards. Humans had learned to predict and shelter from them. But what if they occurred with such regularity that an entire species' biology had evolved around them? It was fascinating how life found ways to persist against seemingly impossible odds. "The storms themselves are not the most dangerous aspect," Professor Zenth Ka continued. "During these events, the planet's predators also seek shelter in the same cavern systems. The Kandorians must not only survive the storms, but defend themselves against creatures that have also evolved to be incredibly resilient." Kreshvor shifted in his seat, and Maya noticed his hand moving to his belt. Thanagarian students were permitted to carry ceremonial weapons as part of their cultural practices, but she'd never seen one drawn in an academic setting. "Weakness disgusts me," Kreshvor muttered, loud enough for nearby students to hear. "Hiding in caves like vermin instead of facing threats directly." Several students turned to look at him, while others deliberately avoided eye contact. Professor Zenth Ka's serpentine head swiveled in his direction. "I beg your pardon, Kreshvor." The Thanagarian's bone ridges seemed to darken. "These Kandorians, they cower instead of fight. My people would never show such cowardice. Survival strategies vary among species based on their environmental pressures and evolutionary development," Professor Zenthka replied coolly. "What you interpret as cowardice might be considered wisdom by another species." "Wisdom?" Kreshvor's voice rose. "There is no wisdom in running from a fight." Maya felt the tension in the room increase. Other students looked uncomfortable, some beginning to gather their belongings as if preparing to leave quickly. She'd heard that Thanagarians could become aggressive when their worldview was challenged, but this was her first time witnessing it. "Perhaps we should move on to the next topic," suggested an Altarian student nervously. Kreshvor stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His hand was now resting on the hilt of what Maya could see was definitely not a ceremonial weapon. The blade's edge caught the classroom's soft lighting with a distinctly sharp gleam. "No," he said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "I think this lesson needs to be corrected." Professor Zenthka's forearms moved in what Maya recognized as a defensive posture. "Kreshvor, you will return to your seat immediately, or I will be forced to contact security." "Security?" The Thanagarian's laugh was like grinding metal. "You prove my point perfectly. Always running to others for protection instead of handling threats yourself." Maya watched as his massive hand closed around the weapon's handle. The blade that emerged was nearly 2 feet long, curved, and obviously designed for combat rather than ceremony. Several students gasped, and she could hear chairs scraping as others moved away from the immediate area. "This is what strength looks like," Kreshvor announced, holding the blade at an angle that caught the light. "This is how real warriors handle problems." The classroom fell silent except for the soft humming of the environmental systems. Professor Zenth Ka had gone very still. Her serpentine body coiled in what Maya was beginning to recognize as a fear response. The other students looked terrified, with some already edging toward the exits. Maya remained seated, studying Kreshvor with curious interest rather than fear. She'd grown up on Earth, a world that the galactic community classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, though most alien species weren't aware of the specific classifications. To them, Earth was simply known as being somewhat hazardous to most galactic standard life forms. What they didn't understand was just how much of an understatement that classification represented. "You disagree with my assessment?" Kreshvor had noticed Maya's calm demeanor and turned his attention to her. "The human stays while others cower. Interesting." Maya tilted her head slightly. "I was just thinking about the lesson, actually." The lesson. His bone ridges darkened further. What lesson could a soft species like yours possibly understand about strength? "Well," Maya said conversationally, "Professor Zenth Ka was explaining adaptation strategies. I was just thinking about how different species develop different approaches to survival challenges." Kreshvor took a step closer, the blade still prominently displayed. "And what approach has your weak species developed?" Maya's smile was small but genuine. "We learned to be very, very good at killing things that try to hurt us." The simple statement, delivered in her calm, almost cheerful tone, seemed to confuse the Thanagarian. He'd clearly expected fear, submission, or at least some form of intimidation response. "You mock me?" "Not at all," Maya replied. "I'm genuinely interested in comparative survival strategies. For instance, Thanagarians developed impressive physical capabilities and martial traditions, very effective for direct confrontation scenarios." She stood slowly, and Kreshvor seemed surprised that she was taller than he'd expected. Not as tall as him, but taller than most galactic standard species. Her movements were fluid and relaxed, showing no signs of the tension that was radiating from everyone else in the room. Humans took a different approach, she continued, as if discussing the weather. We learned to be creative problem solvers. Very creative. Kreshvor's grip on his weapon tightened. Creative? Your species barely qualifies as a spacefaring civilization. That's true, Maya agreed amiably. We're pretty new to the galactic community, but we've been dealing with predators and environmental threats for a very long time. She gestured toward the bio-table's display, which still showed the Kandorian homeworld model. Those storms that force the Kandorians underground? Earth has those too, plus earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, extreme temperature variations, and weather patterns that can kill in dozens of different ways. And yet you survive by hiding, like the Kandorians. Maya's smile widened slightly. Oh, we tried hiding at first. Didn't work very well. So we learned to fight back instead. Fight back? Kreshvor laughed harshly. Against weather? Among other things, Maya said. Weather, natural disasters, diseases, predators that were bigger, faster, and stronger than us. We couldn't change our biology quickly enough to match the threats, so we learned to change our tools and tactics instead. She moved slightly to the side, and Kreshvor automatically adjusted his position to keep facing her. Maya noted with interest that his stance and grip suggested formal training, probably very effective against other Thanagarians or similar species who fought in predictable patterns. The thing about humans, she continued in that same conversational tone, is that we learn to be persistent. When something tries to kill us, we study it until we figure out how to kill it back. Then we get really, really good at that. Enough talk, Kreshvor growled. You will show proper respect, or I will teach you what real strength means. He raised the blade in what was clearly a threatening gesture, and Maya heard Professor Zenth Ka make a soft hissing sound of alarm. Maya's expression didn't change. That's an interesting weapon. Thanagarian military issue? Ceremonial blade of my family line, Kreshvor replied, apparently pleased by what he interpreted as proper recognition of his weapon's significance. Beautiful craftsmanship, Maya said appreciatively. The curve of the blade is designed for slashing attacks, and the weight distribution suggests it's balanced for single-handed use. The edge geometry indicates it's intended for cutting rather than thrusting. Kreshvor looked somewhat surprised by her technical knowledge. You know weapons? I find tools interesting, Maya replied. That's a very effective design for its intended purpose, probably excellent against unarmored or lightly armored opponents, especially in close-quarters combat situations. It has served my family well in battle, Kreshvor said with obvious pride. I'm sure it has, Maya agreed. Though I have to ask, is this really the best environment for demonstrating it? She gestured around the classroom with its delicate equipment, closely packed furniture, and multiple innocent bystanders. A warrior demonstrates strength whenever necessary, Kreshvor replied, though he seemed slightly less certain than before. Maya nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense from a cultural perspective, though I wonder if Professor Zenth Ka was maybe trying to make a different point with today's lesson. What point? Well, she was talking about adaptation strategies, how different species develop different approaches to survival based on their specific environmental pressures. Maya's tone remained calm and educational. The Kandorians face periodic extinction events, so they developed social coordination and tactical withdrawal strategies. Cowardice, Kreshvor muttered, but with less conviction than before. Maybe, Maya said. Or maybe they learned something that your people didn't have to learn because your homeworld presented different challenges. Kreshvor's grip on the weapon remained firm, but Maya noticed he was listening rather than simply posturing. See, the interesting thing about Earth is that we face threats from multiple directions simultaneously. predators, environmental disasters, diseases, resource competition, and each other. So we couldn't specialize in just one survival strategy. She moved again, this time stepping closer rather than away, which clearly wasn't what Kreshvor had expected. We learned that sometimes the best response to a threat is direct confrontation. Sometimes it's tactical withdrawal. Sometimes it's tool use. Sometimes it's cooperation. Sometimes it's deception. Her smile became slightly sharper. And sometimes it's letting the threat think they're in control until you're ready to end the situation on your own terms. Something in her tone made Kreshvor take a half-step backward, though he probably wasn't consciously aware of doing so. The blade is impressive, Maya continued, but waving it around in a classroom full of innocent people isn't really demonstrating strength. It's just demonstrating poor impulse control. You dare! I'm not daring anything, Maya interrupted gently. I'm just finishing Professor Zenthka's lesson on adaptation strategies. She looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time since he'd drawn the weapon, Kreshvor seemed to realize that the small human girl wasn't afraid of him at all. You see, humans learned that true strength isn't about having the biggest weapon or the loudest roar. It's about understanding the situation completely and choosing the most effective response. Maya's voice remained calm, but there was something in her expression that made several students unconsciously step further back. And right now, she said, you're not demonstrating Thanagarian strength. You're just being a bully with a knife. The classroom had gone completely silent. Kreshvor's bone ridges flushed a darker shade of gray, and his grip on the ceremonial blade tightened until Maya could see the tension in his massive forearms. The insult had struck home in a way that physical threats clearly hadn't. You call me a bully? His voice carried a dangerous rumble that made the classroom's transparent walls vibrate slightly. I am Kreshvor, son of Battlelord Thanevor, heir to the Crimson Talon clan. My bloodline has led warriors for 17 generations. Maya nodded respectfully. That's impressive. A lot of history and tradition behind that blade. Then you understand why your words are unacceptable. I understand why you think they are, Maya replied. But I'm wondering if your ancestors would be proud of how you're using their legacy right now. The question seemed to hit Kreshvor like a physical blow. His posture shifted slightly, uncertainty creeping into his aggressive stance. My ancestors were warriors who faced their enemies with honor. Exactly, Maya said. Warriors who faced enemies. Not scholars, not teachers, not classmates who were just trying to learn about xenobiology. She gestured toward Professor Zenthka, who was still frozen in a defensive posture near her teaching station. Professor Zenthka isn't your enemy. She was sharing knowledge about how different species adapt to survival challenges. That's literally what educators do. She insulted the strength of true warriors by praising cowardice. Maya tilted her head thoughtfully. Did she? Or did she explain that different species develop different survival strategies based on their environmental pressures? The same thing, Kreshvor growled. Is it? Maya moved slightly, positioning herself between the Thanagarian and the other students without making it obvious. Let me ask you something about Thanagarian military history. What about it? Your people are famous for their tactical flexibility, right? The ability to adapt strategies based on battlefield conditions? Kreshvor's confusion was evident. Of course. Only fools fight the same battle the same way regardless of circumstances. So, if your unit was facing an enemy force that significantly outnumbered you, and you had intelligence indicating reinforcements were coming, what would standard Thanagarian military doctrine suggest? Tactical withdrawal to a more advantageous position. Kreshvor answered automatically, then stopped as he realized the implications of his response, which an outside observer might call running away, Maya said gently. But you'd call it smart tactics. The Thanagarian's bone ridges were shifting through different shades of gray as he processed this perspective. That's different. Military tactics are not the same as cowardice. Aren't they? Maya asked. The Kandorians face periodic extinction events. Their entire population has to coordinate survival strategies against overwhelming environmental forces and predators. How is that different from a military unit facing superior enemy numbers? Professor Zenth Ka had begun to relax slightly, apparently sensing that the immediate threat was decreasing, though her 4 eyes remained fixed on the still-drawn weapon. The Kandorians work together to survive impossible odds, Maya continued. They've developed communication systems, coordination protocols, and tactical responses that have kept their species alive for millions of years. If that's not military-grade strategic thinking, I don't know what is. HFY lowered the blade slightly, though he didn't sheath it. I had not considered the comparison in those terms. Different perspectives, different interpretations, Maya said. That's kind of the point of comparative xenobiology, learning how other species approach the same fundamental challenges we all face. And what challenges has your species faced? HFY asked, genuine curiosity beginning to replace aggression in his voice. Maya's smile became slightly predatory. Pretty much everything your homeworld has, plus a few extras. Explain. Well, Earth is what the Galactic Survey classifies as a Class 12 Deathworld, Maya said casually, and she heard several sharp intakes of breath from the other students. Most of the galaxy considers it too dangerous for standard life forms. HFY's eyes narrowed. That classification doesn't exist. The highest classification is Class 8. For public records, yes, Maya agreed. Classifications above Class 8 are restricted information because they're considered too disturbing for general galactic society. The Thanagarian looked skeptical. What makes your world so dangerous? Maya thought for a moment about how to explain it in terms he'd understand. Well, we have predators that can kill adult humans in dozens of different ways. Some use venom, some use crushing force, some use pack tactics, some are ambush specialists. Thanagar also has dangerous predators. I'm sure it does, Maya said. But do any of them hunt in 3-dimensional environments with perfect camouflage, paralyzing venom, and the ability to take down prey 50 times their own body weight? HFY's bone ridges darkened with interest rather than anger. What creature has such capabilities? We call them spiders. Well, some spiders. Earth has about 40,000 different spider species, ranging from harmless web builders to active hunters. The dangerous ones can kill a human in minutes. And you fight these creatures? Sometimes, Maya said, but mostly we learn to coexist. See, spiders also kill other things that threaten humans. Mosquitoes that carry diseases, flies that contaminate food, other insects that damage our crops. So we developed a relationship where we generally leave them alone unless they pose a direct threat. Professor Zenth Ka had straightened slightly, apparently finding the educational discussion less threatening than the previous confrontation. But that's just one type of predator, Maya continued. Earth also has creatures that weigh several tons and can run faster than most galactic standard vehicles. We have aerial predators with vision capable of spotting small targets from impossible distances. We have aquatic predators that can bite through metal. How do your people survive against such threats? We learn to be smarter than them, Maya replied. Humans aren't the biggest, fastest, or strongest predators on Earth. But we became the most adaptable. We studied our threats until we understood them better than they understood themselves. She gestured toward the bio table. Professor Zenth Ka was explaining how the Kandorians adapted to their environmental pressures. Humans did something similar, but our pressures were more diverse, so our adaptations were more diverse too. What adaptations? Maya's expression became thoughtful. Tool use, obviously. Language and cooperation. Pattern recognition, long-term planning. But also something most species don't develop. Which is selective aggression, Maya said, and something in her tone made the room's temperature seem to drop several degrees. We learn to be absolutely peaceful until someone or something threatens us or our people. Then we learn to be absolutely ruthless until the threat is eliminated. Kreshvor's grip on his blade had unconsciously tightened again, though this time it seemed defensive rather than aggressive. You see, Maya continued in that same calm tone, humans spent millions of years being prey animals. We were food for creatures that were bigger, stronger, and faster than us. So we learned to think like prey animals, always watching, always planning, always ready to run or hide. She took another step closer, and several students instinctively moved back. But we also learned to think like predators, how to track, how to hunt, how to kill efficiently and without hesitation when necessary. We became the only species on our planet that could switch between predator and prey mindsets based on the situation. That's unusual, Kreshvor admitted. Very unusual, Maya agreed. Most species specialize in one survival strategy or another. Predators think like predators. Prey thinks like prey. Humans learn to think like both, depending on what the situation required. She gestured toward the blade he was still holding. Right now, you're thinking like a traditional predator, using size, strength, and weapons to establish dominance through intimidation. That works well against other predator specialists or prey specialists. But not against humans? Maya's smile was razor-sharp. Humans learned a long time ago that intimidation is just another tool. Sometimes it's effective, sometimes it isn't. What matters is understanding whether you're dealing with an actual threat or just someone making noise. And which am I? That depends, Maya said thoughtfully. Are you actually planning to use that blade on innocent people? Or are you just waving it around because you're frustrated and don't know how to process new information that challenges your worldview? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Kreshvor looked down at the weapon in his hand, then at the terrified faces of his classmates, then at Professor Zenthka's frozen posture. I was not planning to harm innocents, he admitted reluctantly. Then you're not actually a threat, Maya said simply. You're just someone who got confused and made poor decisions about how to express frustration. You're not afraid of me. Should I be? Kreshvor studied her carefully. Most beings fear Thanagarian warriors. Most beings haven't spent their entire evolutionary history learning to kill things that are scarier than Thanagarian warriors, Maya replied matter-of-factly. The Thanagarian's bone ridges went through several color changes as he processed this statement. What could be scarier than a trained Thanagarian warrior? Maya's expression became distant, as if remembering something from long ago. Ever heard of the Terran creature called a saltwater crocodile? No. 20-foot-long ambush predator. Armored hide that can stop most projectile weapons. Bite force strong enough to crush a hover car. Capable of remaining motionless for hours, then exploding into motion faster than most beings can react. They've existed essentially unchanged for millions of years because they became perfect killing machines. And humans fight these. When necessary, Maya said. Though mostly we learn to avoid their territory and respect their capabilities. But the interesting thing about crocodiles is that they're just one of hundreds of apex predators that humans shared the planet with. Hundreds. Different environments, different specialists. Humans learned to survive in environments where we were surrounded by creatures that could kill us without effort. Maya's voice remained conversational, but there was steel underneath it now. We learned to be very, very good at pattern recognition. We learned to spot threats before they became immediate. We learned to plan responses to situations that hadn't happened yet. And we learned that the most dangerous predators are usually the ones that don't announce their presence by roaring and displaying weapons. Kreshvor looked down at his blade again, and for the first time seemed to realize how his behavior must appear to others. I have acted poorly, he said slowly. You got frustrated and reacted emotionally? Maya said. It happens. The important thing is what you do next. What do you suggest? Maya glanced around the classroom at the still frightened faces of the other students and Professor Zenth Ka's tense posture. Well, she said thoughtfully, you could start by putting away the weapon and apologizing to Professor Zenth Ka and your classmates for disrupting the lesson. And then you could listen to the rest of the lesson with an open mind. Learn something about how different species approach survival challenges. Maybe discover that there are more ways to demonstrate strength than intimidating people who can't fight back. Kreshvor was quiet for a long moment, looking around the room as if seeing it clearly for the first time. Then, slowly, he sheathed his blade and straightened into what Maya recognized as a formal military posture. Professor Zenth Ka, he said, his voice carrying a tone of genuine respect. I offer my sincere apologies for my inappropriate behavior. I disrupted your lesson and made your students feel unsafe. This was wrong. Professor Zenth Ka's serpentine body began to uncoil slightly. Apology accepted, Kreshvor. Please return to your seat. He turned to address the other students. I also apologize to my classmates. My behavior was unworthy of a warrior and unworthy of a student. You should not have been forced to witness such a display. The tension in the room began to dissipate as students realized the immediate threat had passed. Some cautiously returned to their seats, while others remained standing but looked less ready to flee. Kreshvor looked back at Maya. And to you, human Maya, I offer both apology and thanks. Thanks? For showing me that true strength sometimes means helping others understand their mistakes rather than simply defeating them, he said. That lesson was more valuable than anything I might have learned from intimidating weaker beings. Maya's smile became warmer and more genuine. That's very gracious of you, Kreshvor. And please, just Maya is fine. Maya, he repeated. May I ask you something? Sure. Earlier you mentioned that humans learn to be peaceful until threatened, then become ruthless until threats are eliminated. His bone ridges had returned to their normal color, but his eyes remained intensely focused. At what point in our encounter did you determine that I was not actually a threat? Maya tilted her head thoughtfully. When you started asking questions instead of just making demands. Actual predators don't usually stop to debate philosophy or explain their cultural traditions. And if I had been an actual threat? The room went very quiet again, and Maya's expression became unreadable. Then this conversation would have gone very differently, she said simply. Something in her tone made Kreshvor take an unconscious step backward. And several other students looked suddenly nervous again. How differently? He asked quietly. Maya's smile returned, but it wasn't entirely reassuring. Let's just say that Professor Zenth Ka would have needed to request a cleanup crew and possibly some counseling for the students. You would have killed me? If you had actually threatened innocent people? Without hesitation, Maya replied matter-of-factly. But you didn't, so we got to have a nice educational discussion instead. Kreshvor stared at her for a moment, then slowly nodded. I believe I understand now why your species was able to survive on a Class 12 Deathworld. One of the reasons, Maya agreed. We learned that the universe is generally a pretty peaceful place if you don't go around starting trouble. But we also learned to be prepared for the times when trouble finds you anyway. Professor Zenth Ka had finally returned to her normal posture and was organizing her teaching materials again. If everyone is ready, she said, perhaps we can return to the lesson? I believe we were discussing adaptation strategies in extreme environments. Actually, Professor, Maya said, raising her hand. Would it be possible to include Earth's ecosystems in today's discussion? I think there might be some interesting comparisons to draw with the Kandorian survival adaptations. An excellent suggestion, Professor Zenthka replied, her confidence returning as the classroom settled back into academic normalcy. Class 12 environmental pressures would indeed provide valuable comparative data. Kreshvor settled into his seat, but his attention remained focused on Maya with what looked like newfound respect. Maya, he said quietly, I would be honored to learn more about your homeworld's challenges and how your people developed such effective survival strategies. I'd be happy to share, Maya replied. Earth's ecosystems are pretty fascinating once you get past the part where everything's trying to kill you. The classroom erupted in nervous laughter, and Professor Zenthka began pulling up new data sets on the bio table's holographic display. The holographic display above the bio table shimmered and reformed, now showing a blue-green sphere marked with swirling white clouds. Maya felt a familiar pang of homesickness as Earth's image rotated slowly in the artificial light. Earth, Professor Zenthka announced, manipulating the controls to zoom in on different continents. Designated as restricted for general colonization due to environmental hazards. Maya, would you care to provide some context for your classmates? Maya stood, noting that several students leaned forward with genuine interest while others still looked somewhat nervous. Kreshvor was watching her with the intense focus of someone who had just discovered they'd been fundamentally wrong about something important. Sure, Maya said, moving closer to the display. Earth is what happens when you take every possible environmental challenge and put them all on the same planet. She gestured toward the image. We have deserts where the daytime temperature can kill most galactic standard life forms in minutes, and polar regions where the nighttime temperature would freeze nitrogen solid. Impressive temperature variations, commented Sheer N, the Veiltar student. My people require very stable thermal conditions. That's just the beginning, Maya replied. Earth also has weather systems that can generate wind speeds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour, precipitation that can flood entire cities, and electrical storms that release more energy than most starships' power cores. She manipulated the display to show a cross-section view of the planet's structure. The ground itself isn't stable. We have tectonic activity that can suddenly shift entire land masses, volcanic eruptions that can change global weather patterns, and earthquakes that can level cities. How do humans build permanent settlements under such conditions? Asked an Altarian student. Very carefully, Maya said with a slight smile. We learn to predict patterns, engineer structures that can withstand extreme forces, and most importantly, we learn to be mobile when necessary. Professor Zenthka adjusted the display to show Earth's ocean systems. The planet is primarily covered by water, correct? About 70% ocean surface, Maya confirmed, which brings us to a whole different set of challenges. The image zoomed in on the ocean depths, revealing creatures that made several students gasp in surprise. Marine predators, Maya explained. Some of our oceans contain creatures larger than most starships. The blue whale, for instance, can reach lengths of over 30 meters and masses of nearly 200 tons. Are they dangerous? Kreshvor asked. Blue whales? Not to humans, Maya replied. They eat tiny organisms called krill, but they're good examples of the scale of life that Earth supports. She changed the display to show a different creature. Now this is dangerous. The image showed a streamlined form with rows of triangular teeth and dead black eyes. Great white shark, Maya said conversationally. Apex predator, can grow to over 6 meters in length, swim at speeds up to 56 kilometers per hour, and has a bite force of over 18,000 newtons. Several students made uncomfortable noises, and Maya noticed that even Professor Zenthka's serpentine form had tensed slightly. Humans swim in the same waters as these creatures? Asked an Altarian. All the time, Maya confirmed. We learned to understand their behavior patterns, avoid looking like their preferred prey, and respect their territory. Shark attacks on humans are actually quite rare because we figured out how to coexist. You coexist with creatures that could easily kill you? Kreshvor's voice carried a note of disbelief. That's the thing about Earth, Maya said, changing the display to show various terrestrial predators. Almost everything can easily kill us. We're not particularly fast, strong, or well-armed compared to our planet's other predators. The images cycled through bears, big cats, venomous snakes, and other creatures that made the classroom audience increasingly uncomfortable. So, how did your species become dominant? Asked Professor Zenthka. We didn't, Maya replied, and the simplicity of her statement seemed to surprise everyone. We never became dominant in the traditional sense. We just became really good at avoiding, deterring, or eliminating specific threats when necessary. She manipulated the display to show human settlements integrated into natural environments. Instead of conquering Earth's ecosystems, we learned to fit into them. We studied every predator, every environmental hazard, every potential threat until we understood them well enough to predict their behavior. But surely human technology eventually provided superiority over natural predators, suggested the Altarian student. Technology helped, Maya agreed. But the important realization was that we didn't need to be superior to everything. We just needed to be smart enough to avoid unnecessary conflicts and effective enough to win necessary ones. Kreshvor raised his hand. Can you provide a specific example? Maya thought for a moment. Sure. In some regions of Earth, humans share territory with creatures called brown bears. Adult brown bears can weigh over 600 kilograms, run faster than humans, climb trees, swim, and have claws and teeth that can tear through most materials. Formidable opponents, Kreshvor acknowledged. Exactly, Maya said. So humans in those regions learned brown bear behavioral patterns. We figured out what attracted them, what they considered threatening, how they communicated warnings, and what their territorial boundaries looked like. She pulled up an image showing humans and bears coexisting in the same landscape. The result is that humans and bears rarely come into conflict because we learn to read each other's signals and respect each other's space. And when conflicts do occur? Professor Zenthka asked. Maya's expression became more serious. When a bear actually threatens human lives, humans respond with whatever force is necessary to eliminate the threat. But that's usually a last resort because we prefer solutions that don't require killing things. Interesting approach, Kreshvor said thoughtfully. Most warrior cultures would simply eliminate potential threats preemptively. We tried that for a while, Maya replied. Turned out to be counterproductive. When you remove predators from an ecosystem, their prey species populations explode, which creates different problems. We learned that it's usually better to maintain natural balance and just be very good at avoiding or deterring threats. She changed the display to show Earth's diverse biomes. This approach let us spread across every environment on the planet. Humans live in Arctic conditions where the air itself can freeze lung tissue, desert regions where water is scarce and temperatures are lethal, tropical environments with diseases that can kill in days, and mountainous regions where the atmosphere contains insufficient oxygen for most life forms. Your species is remarkably adaptable, observed Sheer-An. We had to be, Maya said. Earth doesn't really have safe zones. Even in the most benign environments, there are predators, environmental hazards, or resource competition issues that require constant awareness and adaptation. Professor Zenthka had been studying the data feeds while Maya spoke. I'm seeing some fascinating parallels to the Kandorian survival strategies we discussed earlier. Both species developed sophisticated threat assessment and response protocols. That's what caught my attention too, Maya agreed. The Kandorians face periodic extreme events, so they developed coordination and shelter strategies. Humans face constant moderate to extreme threats, so we developed individual and small group threat assessment and response capabilities. Different environmental pressures, different adaptations, Kreshvor said, and Maya could hear understanding in his voice. Exactly, Maya confirmed. The Kandorians' approach works perfectly for their world. Our approach works for ours. Neither is inherently superior. They're just different solutions to different problems. And Thanagarian approaches work for Thanagar, Professor Zenth-Ka added pointedly. Kreshvor's bone ridges shifted to what Maya was beginning to recognize as an embarrassed color. Yes, Professor. I understand that now. Maya manipulated the display to show human settlements on Earth, cities integrated into natural landscapes, agricultural systems that worked with existing ecosystems, and transportation networks that minimized environmental disruption. The interesting thing, she said, is that once humans learned to coexist with Earth's challenges instead of trying to dominate them, we started developing technologies and strategies that worked really well for space exploration, too. How so? Asked an Altarian student. Well, space is basically the ultimate hostile environment, Maya explained. No atmosphere, extreme temperature variations, radiation, micrometeorites, and if anything goes wrong, you die quickly. But humans had already learned to be really good at threat assessment, emergency preparation, redundant safety systems, and rapid problem-solving under pressure. She pulled up images of human space habitats. So when we started leaving Earth, we were already trained to assume that everything was trying to kill us and plan accordingly. That explains the human reputation for excessive safety protocols, Professor Zenth-Ka observed. From our perspective, there's no such thing as excessive safety protocols, Maya replied cheerfully. There are just safety protocols that work and safety protocols that get you killed. Kreshvor had been studying the display intently. Maya, may I ask you something personal? Sure. Earlier, when I was behaving inappropriately, you mentioned that humans learn to switch between predator and prey mindsets. Which mindset were you using during our encounter? Maya considered the question carefully. Both, actually. I was thinking like prey in terms of constantly assessing the threat level, identifying escape routes, and monitoring the safety of bystanders. But I was also thinking like a predator in terms of studying your behavioral patterns, identifying weaknesses in your approach, and calculating the most efficient way to neutralize the threat if necessary. And at what point would you have switched to full predator mode? The classroom went very quiet again, and Maya's expression became unreadable. If you had actually moved to attack Professor Zenth-Ka or any of the other students, she said simply, the moment you demonstrated genuine intent to harm innocents, I would have stopped thinking about your feelings, your cultural background, or your personal circumstances. I would have focused entirely on ending the threat as quickly and efficiently as possible. How quickly? Maya's smile was razor-sharp. You would have been unconscious or dead before you completed your attack motion. Kreshvor stared at her for a moment. You're certain of this? Completely, Maya replied without hesitation. Humans train for threat response from childhood. We practice situational awareness, threat assessment, and emergency response until they become automatic reflexes. But you appear so peaceful, observed Shir-En. Most of the time we are, Maya agreed. Like I said, we learned that the universe is generally a pretty nice place if you don't go around starting trouble. But we also learned that there are beings who do start trouble, and when they do, the best response is to end the situation quickly and decisively. Professor Zenth-Ka had been listening to this exchange with obvious fascination. This represents a fascinating evolutionary adaptation. Your species developed the ability to rapidly shift between cooperative and aggressive behavioral modes based on environmental requirements. It served us well, Maya said. Both on Earth and in our interactions with galactic society. Speaking of galactic society, Kreshvor said, I'm curious about something. If Earth is as dangerous as you've described, why haven't humans become more aggressive in their interactions with other species? Maya's expression became thoughtful. Because most galactic species aren't threats. You weren't really a threat either. You were just confused and frustrated. Actual threats are pretty rare. But when they do occur, when actual threats occur, humans respond appropriately, Maya said simply. We just make sure we're very clear about the distinction between someone being annoying and someone being dangerous. And how do you make that distinction? Maya gestured around the classroom. Intent and capability. You had capability. You're physically powerful and armed. But your intent wasn't actually to harm innocents. You were performing aggression rather than planning violence. Performing aggression? Threat display, Maya explained. Like a territorial animal making noise to establish dominance. Annoying and inappropriate, but not actually dangerous to anyone who understands what they're looking at. And if my intent had been genuinely hostile? Maya's smile became predatory again. Then you would have discovered why Earth is classified as a Class 12 Deathworld and why humans are very good at surviving there. The implications of that statement settled over the classroom like a weight. Professor Zenthka cleared her throat. Perhaps we should return to the academic aspects of our discussion. Maya, would you be willing to provide more detailed information about Earth's ecosystem dynamics for our next class? I'd be happy to, Maya replied, her demeanor shifting back to that of an enthusiastic student. Earth's biodiversity is incredible. We have environments that showcase almost every known survival strategy, plus a few that are unique to our planet. Excellent, Professor Zenthka said. Class dismissed. Kreshvor, please remain after for a moment. As students began gathering their belongings, Kreshvor approached Maya. Maya, he said formally, I want you to know that today has been educational, in ways I had not expected. For me, too, Maya replied genuinely. I learned a lot about Thanagarian culture and military traditions. That blade really is beautifully crafted. Perhaps, he said slowly, you would be willing to teach me more about human threat assessment and response strategies? Maya's smile was warm. I'd like that, but maybe we could start with the peaceful coexistence strategies. The threat response stuff is pretty intense. Agreed, Kreshvor said. I think I have seen enough of the threat response approach for one day. As they left the classroom together, chatting about the differences between Earth and Thanagar ecosystems, Professor Zenthka made a mental note to request additional information about Class 12 Deathworld classifications. She had a feeling that today's lesson had revealed more about human capabilities than her students, or her academic supervisors, fully understood. And somehow, she suspected that Maya Chen had intended exactly that result. The girl from the Deathworld had finished the lesson indeed, but the subject matter had been far more complex than simple xenobiology. She had taught a masterclass in human diplomacy, the art of achieving complete victory while making everyone involved feel like they had learned something valuable. Professor Zenthka began planning her report to the Academy administration. They needed to know what they had enrolled in their advanced programs, and perhaps more importantly, they needed to understand why that knowledge should make them very, very grateful that humans seemed to prefer cooperation to conquest. In the corridor outside, Maya and Kreshvor continued their conversation about adaptation strategies, while other students gave them a respectfully wide berth. Word was already spreading through the academy about the human girl who had calmly faced down an armed Thanagarian warrior and somehow turned a potential tragedy into an educational experience. By evening, Maya Chen had become something of a legend among the student body, not because she had fought and won, but because she had managed to achieve total victory without fighting at all. It was, several professors agreed, a very human approach to problem solving, and absolutely terrifying in its effectiveness.